You, get out of the house by the end of this month. My husband said with a smile, even before saying I'm home. I freeze with my mouth hanging open at the sudden mention of this, and my husband puts words in my mouth. You only give birth to girls, and all you do is complain about housework and caregiving. You're just a nuisance, so please leave. My husband revealed the fact that he had been unfaithful to me in a matter-of-fact manner. In fact, I was stunned by his words that denied everything about me. After getting married, I got pregnant for the first time and gave birth to twin girls. What awaited me after enduring those dizzying days was living with my in-laws. Though I had been invited to live together so my mother-in-law would support me, raising twins alone would be tough. My suffering only doubled when I actually moved in. My mother-in-law didn't take care of my daughters or even my husband. She even left my father-in-law, who she claimed to have been looking after all this time, to me. Now that she had free time, she spent every day sitting in front of the TV, just bossing everyone around. On top of that, there was my husband's grandfather, who needed care. Even though we had agreed to leave it to a professional caregiver, she ended up pushing the responsibility onto me, saying it was a waste of money. I was treated as nothing more than a maid and a caregiver, with no appreciation. Still, to my daughters, he was a loving dad and a grandpa, and that's why I endured it all. With a glare filled with anger, I stared at my husband, only to receive a flippant and frivolous smile in return. Yeah, take the kids too, since they're also a nuisance. Even without you telling me, there's no way I'd leave my daughters in such hell. I slowly opened my mouth and smiled at my husband. Cannon, Leon, Ken. Breakfast's ready, so hurry up and wake up. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. Our family of four's morning always started here. My name is Maddie. Before marrying Ken, I was fully dedicated to my job in a general company, to the point where my colleagues would call me a workaholic who found meaning only in work. At 26, I was nearing 30 and feeling anxious about it. So, with the help of a friendly colleague, I organized a group blind date with 4 of us and another group of 4. While everyone else was engaging in lively conversation, my lack of social skills due to being a workaholic left me feeling like an outcast. Initially, people tried to include me, but soon they moved on to other topics. At that moment, I deeply regretted my life of burying myself in work and ignoring reality. During the break, we went to the restroom in pairs. I stood up with my colleague, and I confided in her about the dilemma I was facing. Why is this so difficult? The preliminary steps before a relationship develops. You see, Maddie, you've been focused on work for so long, so it's natural that things aren't going smoothly. Look, you still give off that vibe of being a complete novice in love. You're trying to comfort me, but honestly, it's not comforting at all. I get it now, though. It's embarrassing to be a novice in love at my age, always just focused on work. But what can I do? I just don't know. While I excel at supporting my colleagues in our team at work, when it comes to romance, I feel completely lost. I don't understand myself anymore, and I can't seem to find the right solution. I thought that because I could handle work perfectly, I could also handle romance efficiently. However, after just a few hours at the first venue, I was on the verge of giving up. Maddie, you try too hard to be efficient at everything, and that's your downfall. Just relax a little and, if you don't understand, just act accordingly. Though I didn't fully grasp my colleague's advice, I decided to take it and embrace my status as a love novice without hiding it, and try again. When my colleague informed a man about my status as a love novice, rather than pretending to be a love expert, the barrier between me and the man crumbled, and our conversation flowed more naturally. Although I could converse somewhat with other men, the conversation with the man my colleague recommended was the most enjoyable. He was the only one I exchanged contact information with after the mixer. And that man, believe it or not, was my husband, Ken. After a year of dating, Ken and I got married. And a year later, twins Cannon and Leon were born, making us a family of 4. Or so it should have been. Given my focus on work until now, even after the birth of my daughters, I wanted to continue working. But I deeply realized, when I met Ken, that I'm not skilled enough to balance unfamiliar childcare with work, despite my desire to do so. One of the reasons I had no choice but to quit my job was Ken's family asking us to live with them. My grandfather's halfway bedridden at home, and my mom and the others can't handle the care alone. I want Maddie to help out with that. Please, they're important family members. But even if you suddenly say that, with twins already, it's twice as much work. My mom and the others are there, it's fine. It won't be too hard. Please, I rarely ask for anything, right? So please. Think of it as one of my few requests. Indeed, even during our dating days, I rarely saw Ken ask anyone, including me, for personal favors. He either solved everything himself or asked someone for help only when absolutely necessary. His personality of trying to handle everything on his own, similar to when he was working, was something I could relate to and empathize with. So when Ken pleaded with such urgency, I immediately understood from his anxious expression that it must be a serious matter. Unable to resist his desperate plea, we decided to move in with Ken's parents and grandfather, who needed care. But from then on, it was a whirlwind of busy days. This is how our days begin. I wake the children early to accommodate Ken's early work schedule, and although it's been a year since the twins were born, I'm reminded of how challenging mornings used to be, trying to wake them up. Cannon and Leon. The twins are alike in personality and even in their sleeping positions, but for some reason, it's always Cannon who wakes up stronger. With the remarkable ability to wake up easily to my voice, Cannon wakes up and then wakes up Leon sleeping next to him. Thanks to this, I can feed them breakfast together without having to wake them up myself. Despite Ken having a long history of early morning work, he's particularly weak in the mornings. Even when Cannon tries to wake him up, Leon, who has just woken up, tries to pull Cannon back into bed to sleep together, and in the end, it's always me who ends up waking him up every day. I've set an alarm for the night before, but for some reason, the alarm never seems to go off at the set time, probably because Ken, who woke up in the middle of the night, turns it off. I tried to set a password on my phone so that Ken couldn't easily stop it, but in the end, the phone was silenced by pillows and blankets, rendering it useless. It's quite a conundrum to have small children waking up like adults while Ken, the adult, struggles to wake up like a child. And I can't help but feel that it's all because of Ken's parents living with us. You see, Ken has 2 older sisters, and as the youngest and only boy among the 3 siblings, he was indulged by his parents as he grew up. While they spoiled Ken, his parents also led a life of dependency, often leaving most of life's decisions up to them. From my perspective, Ken is being manipulated by his parents. I had no intention of becoming a puppet for Ken and his family. Or so I thought, but later I would come to realize that crossing the threshold of that house at Ken's request was the mistake in the first place. It was when I returned home after sending Cannon and Leon to kindergarten, having seen Ken off to work. As I was about to clean up the breakfast dishes, I heard an alarm coming from the room where Ken's bedridden grandfather was. This alarm could signal various needs such as changing diapers, feeding, or needing to be turned over, and it would always come at any time. If I hesitated even for a moment, under the immense pressure from Ken's parents, who demanded my constant attention. Maddie, why are you ignoring Dad's alarm? Neglecting Dad, who can't move properly, what exactly do you think you're doing? I'm sorry, I just couldn't let go of what I was doing at that moment. No excuses. You're able to handle all the housework, childcare, and even Dad's care, so don't forget that you're Ken's wife after all. Keep that in mind. When I came here, I thought I would only be taking care of twins and the basic housework, but as it turned out, I ended up doing everything in the house, both mentally and physically exhausted. If it were just my mother-in-law who was harsh, it might have been tolerable, but even my father-in-law is harsh with me. I've come to realize that my father-in-law holds on to old-fashioned beliefs and is the type to impose those beliefs on others. He doesn't seem to appreciate the fact that I gave birth to twin girls, rather than boys, and I've never once seen him acknowledge me or show any positive signs toward me, ignoring or rejecting any conversation I initiate. I've never seen my father-in-law acknowledge me or show any positive signs toward me, ignoring or rejecting any conversation I initiate. Even though they're my in-laws, I'm treated like fragile goods here, despite being part of the family when I married Ken. Hey Ken. Can't you help out a bit with housework or taking care of twins on your days off? Why should I? Maddie has been doing all the housework so far, hasn't she? I work outside, bring in the money, while Maddie takes care of the housework and childcare. That's only natural, isn't it? Influenced by his upbringing by such parents, Ken has fully internalized the outdated idea that household chores, childcare, and other household tasks are all women's responsibilities, and he doesn't help at all. Naturally, I can't handle everything alone, and if I slack off even a bit, my in-laws eagerly ridicule and belittle me, repeatedly ordering me to redo tasks. Caught between my in-laws and Ken, I did my best to protect Canon and Leon, more so than during my career woman days when I worked tirelessly. By the way, Maddie, do you have any plans to have more children in the future? Huh? Children. Well, for now, since we already have Canon and Leon, maybe we can consider it once things settle down with the two of them. What are you saying? All your children are girls, right? It's customary for us to have a boy as the heir. Surely you're not considering letting your daughters inherit, are you? Of course not. We're thinking about it carefully. I also want a boy right now, and I've talked to Maddie about it. We'll make sure to have children properly. What are you talking about? Right now, I'm not. Well then, that's good to hear. I'm expecting great things from you. Both of you. Make sure to produce a fine boy, Maddie. Even during family meals, I am astonished by the trivial conversations that Ken and the others engage in, and I try to alleviate my mental stress by thinking of them as nothing more than strangers who happen to speak the same language. However, Ken, without considering my feelings, acts only to meet his parents' expectations and invites me to engage in intimate activities every night, but I absolutely refuse to accept his invitations. My feelings for Ken have cooled completely since coming to my in-laws' house, and I am exhausted both mentally and physically from being burdened with all the household responsibilities. Above all, resting my body became my top priority, and it was a small act of resistance against the unreasonable demands of my in-laws. You, at least consider my parents and your own position, won't you? Who is saying such things? Is it to a wife who is completely exhausted? I no longer understand Ken at all. Where did I go wrong? What did I do wrong? I have neither the knowledge nor the capacity to know. Above all, quitting my job was a blow. No matter how I manage the household finances, I can't save enough money to run away with my daughters. Moreover, even if I wanted to get another job, I couldn't run away because of issues like my daughter's daycare and my grandfather-in-law's care. Besides, as a husband, Ken is the only parent for my daughters. Deciding to prioritize only my daughters and becoming a robot that does nothing but household chores and takes care of my grandfather-in-law's care without any emotion, one day. I received an email saying Ken would be staying overnight at work, and the next day, when he came back, he took off his suit jacket vigorously in front of me and my in-laws with a beaming smile. Welcome home. Why do you look so happy? It must be something ridiculous. This time, I have a mistress, and she is currently pregnant. What? Is he drinking, or has he finally gone mad? At a time when life is difficult with household chores, childcare, and pressure from my parents-in-law, why would he say such a thing? From now on, I have decided to live with her in this house. Looking at Ken's beaming smile and serious gaze as he stared at us, I was convinced that he wasn't joking. He was serious about saying such a foolish thing. It hasn't even been 5 years since we got married. Even though Canon and Leon are still small and it's a difficult time, to pretend to be working and then go out and make a woman pregnant. And not just any woman, but an affair partner. To the unbelievably terrible remarks, although my mouth hung open in shock and disbelief, when I looked to see how my in-laws would react, surprisingly, they didn't seem surprised at all. On the contrary, they stood up and had big smiles on their faces. You're having a child. And you've come to announce it to us, right? Is it a boy? Was it a boy? We went for tests together today, and guess what? It's a boy. Just as we talked about, it's a boy. From the way they weren't surprised by the sudden announcement, it seems they had been consulting with my in-laws about the possibility of having a child with an affair partner for some time now. I can't believe they all conspired together like this just because they wanted a boy and readily agreed to the affair. It's insane. Driven by my in-laws' reactions and ignoring me, Ken and his parents continued the conversation enthusiastically, and it was decided that the affair partner would live in this family home where I, Canon, and Leon also reside. Well done! As expected of my son. You've done well to get a boy pregnant. What a good son you are. With this, the issue of succession in the family is also resolved. We were wondering what to do if that child's child was also a girl. But I believed you could handle it. It's thanks to the two of you pushing me forward. Thanks to that, she was reassured, and she agreed to live together in this house. As I witnessed their completely insane celebration, the last shreds of emotion I had towards my husband vanished into thin air. Watching the three of them dance with joy, I glanced sideways and returned to my room, determined to leave this house as soon as possible. I started packing only the bare essentials. Mommy, what's wrong? Are you going out? Canon, Leon. Yes, we're going out. We won't live in this house anymore, we'll live with Mommy, just the three of us. While Canon and Leon, who still didn't understand the situation, gathered their outing sets, I hurriedly headed towards the entrance with the two of them. Returning to the living room, they didn't seem to care at all that I was preparing to leave. They continued to dance for joy as if nothing had happened. With my luggage and Canon and Leon in tow, as I passed through the living room, they finally noticed my presence. Where do you think you're going with all that luggage? Where are you going? In what capacity is a man who has been out there having an affair with a strange woman and having children with her asking us such a thing? Where do I think I'm going? It's obvious. Anywhere but this nonsensical place would be fine. I didn't want to see his face or let my children see or hear him. I left Canon and Leon waiting at the entrance for the moment. A carry-on suitcase and the slightly oversized backpack I used during my student days. And noticing that my children's cute little backpacks were packed full, even Ken, who is usually oblivious, seemed to catch on and dismissed it with a snicker. Well, aren't you perceptive? It saves us the trouble of having to bring it up. So, this is probably the most necessary thing for us now, right? With that, he handed me a divorce agreement form, with only his section neatly filled out, from the drawer in the living room. It's too well prepared. I can't help but feel terrified, thinking he might have prepared this even before marrying me. But admittedly, it's convenient for me that Ken's section is cleanly filled out now. I don't want him to drag his feet later and cancel the divorce. And above all, I won't have to see this family's faces anymore. The only thing that concerns me a little is my bedridden grandfather-in-law. He's generally indifferent due to being bedridden, and he's probably listening to this conversation right now, but he doesn't seem to care about the situation at all. Taking the pre-filled divorce agreement, without a trace of regret, I left the family home where I had lived for several years with my two children. I'm angry at myself from back then, with Ken and my naive thoughts about participating in that mixer and getting married. Unable to calm my anger, I couldn't help but grab a passing taxi and filled out the remaining sections of the divorce papers with forceful strokes in the waiting area of the municipal office. I knew it wasn't good to take it out on things or people, but I couldn't control my anger. I simply handed the divorce papers to the clerk with a word, submitting them almost forcefully. Thus, my divorce with Ken was finalized, and I became a single mother of two. I filed for divorce in the heat of the moment, but I have no regrets whatsoever. However, finding a new home for the three of us right away won't be easy. Instead, there's hardly any real estate agent willing to rent a house to a family like ours, with such obvious issues. After much consideration, I decided to rely on my parents' home for the first time in 10 years. I hadn't been very close to my parents. We argued about which university to attend or which company to work for, and gradually grew apart. Moreover, my parents were quite against my marriage to Kazuki. After storming out of the house following their demands to reconsider, all communication had been through phone calls or emails. Every time I endured the mistreatment at my in-laws' house, thoughts of returning home crossed my mind repeatedly. But lacking the insight to see through Kazuki's true nature and refusing to admit that my parents were right, I simply ran away. In the end, I used household chores, childcare, and caregiving as excuses to avoid facing my parents. In the current situation, I can't prioritize my pride as I did before. Upon contacting them, my mother immediately urged me to return, and my father came to pick me up. I was prepared for harsh words, but my parents were engrossed with their grandchildren whom they hadn't seen in a long time. I'm sorry for everything. You were right about everything, Mom. I thanked and apologized, explaining everything in detail. Initially scowling at me, my father quickly redirected his anger towards Kazuki and his family. What? There's absolutely no way such a thing can be forgiven. It's outrageous to cheat for such unreasonable reasons, even if it's about the child's gender. And the fact that the parents are condoning it is insane. In unison, they made it clear that we didn't have to return to that house. And offered their full support for me to settle here, find a job, and raise Canon and the others. Since I got a job, I hadn't contacted them at all. Looking back, it seemed like I got married, had children, then suddenly returned, and then got divorced. Despite my misconduct as their daughter, they didn't disregard me and listened to me carefully, expressing their anger. This made me realize the importance of family once again. Mom, Dad. I'm sorry for everything. Thank you for helping me. Finally, when my emotions settled, hunger began to gnaw at me, as I hadn't eaten lunch and had rushed out. Both Cannon and Leon seemed hungry too. Seeing our hungry faces, my mother prepared some simple pre-cooked dishes from the refrigerator and a chicken soup with plenty of ingredients that I used to love. The taste of this soup, with the nostalgic chicken broth and the sweet pumpkin, carrots, and corn that was a staple in my childhood home, filled me with a sense of comfort and warmth. Unbeknownst to me, tears welled up in my eyes. After that, realizing I couldn't rely on my parents' home forever, I started looking for a job. Though I had been a hardworking career woman until a few years ago, the gap in my resume from being a full-time housewife posed a significant challenge in the job market. Nevertheless, I persevered, continued attending interviews, and finally landed a part-time job at a household services company. Although it was a different job from what I had done before, I believed I could utilize the skills I gained from household chores and childcare. That's why I applied for the job. It was a small service company, but the president and other employees were cheerful and kind. While Cannon and Leon felt lonely for a while because they couldn't go to kindergarten, they seemed to sense something and didn't complain, enjoying their time happily with their grandparents at home. With the support of my family, we managed to get by. 3 months later, on a certain day, suddenly, Ken visited my parents' house. Thinking it was a delivery, I opened the door, only to find a Ken who looked much more haggard than when we parted, standing with his head bowed. As soon as he saw my face, Ken grabbed my shoulders forcefully and repeatedly begged for reconciliation.
Please, Maddie. I was wrong. Can't we start over again? You're the only one for me. Please, I beg you, Maddie.
With each escalating plea, tears welled up in Ken's eyes, and eventually, he began to cry uncontrollably, repeating the same request.
What on earth are you doing? Don't come here to my parents' house.
It's over between us. Don't show up here again. I had nothing to say to my divorced partner and had no use for him, so I tried to dismiss him at the door, but a tearful Ken started screaming like a child begging for a toy. Since further arguing might cause a disturbance in the neighborhood. And Cannon and Leon were inside playing with their grandmother while kindergarten was closed. We have finally settled down in our lives, but I don't want this man to destroy our happy home again. I decided to pull Ken's arm and move to a nearby cafe. In the quiet ambience of the cafe, with jazz music playing softly, and with a cup of coffee prepared by the elderly master, I thought we could have a calm conversation. So, this was the place I chose. After taking a sip of coffee, Ken began to answer my question about why he visited my parents' house.
I realize that I and our family need you after all.
To the woman who became the cause of my departure, Ken hadn't actually mentioned anything about our family or caregiving responsibilities. Instead, he demanded that she quit her job and take care of everything once she became his wife, including childcare, house chores, and taking care of his elderly grandfather. However, it was impossible for someone who hadn't been informed about any of this to easily agree. As expected, the woman got angry and left without even saying hello. With no one to handle household chores or caregiving responsibilities, my mother ended up taking care of everything. But what she used to manage without difficulty was now impossible, and she ended up falling ill. For Ken and his family, who relied on my mother as their last resort, if she became ill, there was nothing they could do. And they couldn't rely on my father, who was as stubborn as ever. Since Ken had always left household chores and caregiving to others, he reluctantly decided to use caregiving services. However, while he could arrange for caregiving, household chores remained unattended. It seemed that Ken's family didn't have the financial means to afford further services. As a result, their home became neglected, resembling more of a garbage dump. This led to frequent arguments between Ken's parents and Ken himself about who was to blame for the situation. Ken's parents blamed him for not being able to handle household chores or bring a woman capable of bearing a son. However, they eventually realized that it wasn't the time for such arguments. They understood that it would be best to reconcile with me, who had managed everything at home for a short period. Of course, upon hearing such a proposal, I had no intention of reconciling with Ken or returning to that house to help with household chores or caregiving. Anyone would think the same upon hearing my situation. After all, when I was managing everything alone at my in-laws' house, I had to remember everyone's likes, dislikes, and allergies besides cooking, and I couldn't sit at the table until after finishing cleanup. And even after sitting down, I had to assist Cannon and Leon with their meals while also helping my grandfather-in-law eat. Finally, by the time I could eat, the freshly cooked rice brought to me was completely cold. Even with household chores, Ken had always assumed that I would only help because his mother was there. But in reality, I ended up doing everything while his mother and the others just complained about the results. This is what they call having a mother-in-law, but it's not something that can be dismissed with convenient words. I had researched what marriage was like in advance, but this kind of terrible married life was presented as the worst-case scenario. I no longer wanted to live with people who only thought about themselves.
Please! Come back to me. If you come back now, I'll give you that house. My parents are getting old. They might not be able to move and might have to go to a facility. So what?
What's your point?
So, if the rights to the house are transferred to me, I'll give the rights to the house to you. Then, you can have the house no matter what. How about that? So please, come back to me.
On his knees, Ken proposed transferring the rights to the house back to me while presenting conditions. Recalling my mother's words from just the other day, I sighed. You know? Ken will probably try to convince you to reconcile with him. But no matter what he says, don't agree. Whether he appeals to your emotions or offers money, people don't change so easily. They may seem fine at first, but once you go back, they'll likely revert to their old ways. I never thought Ken, who praised his affair partner so much, still had feelings for me, but I never expected him to try to buy me off. Certainly, that house, having been built ages ago and renovated multiple times, is among the largest in the neighborhood. In the past, I might have been dazzled by the prospect of eventually getting that house. But according to Ken's argument, the transfer would only happen after my in-laws became incapacitated. And there's no guarantee that such a promise would be kept. In the end, I'd just be treated like a slave again. The fact that Ken sees this as beneficial for me shows that he still sees me as nothing more than a domestic robot. It's a ridiculous proposal, and there's no way I'll agree to it.
I don't want a remarriage that feels like some sort of slave contract, and I don't need that unpleasant memory-stained house. I won't rescind the divorce. All I ask from you is alimony and child support. Stay away from us.
Why did he think he could persuade me with such a vague and foolish idea? His shallow thinking is beyond exasperating, it's pitiful. I won't extend a helping hand out of pity, and instead, I'll focus on giving even more love to Cannon and Leon. There's no point in trying to reason with him anymore, it's just a waste of time. With that declaration, I finished my coffee, paid for my portion, feeling the presence of Ken sobbing behind me, and left the cafe. Afterward, as I declared, I demanded alimony from both my husband and his mistress. The mistress initially tried to claim ignorance of Ken's marital status and escape, but I presented evidence that Ken himself knew, so she had no way to deny it. I didn't hesitate to demand alimony from the mistress, even though I know Ken is strapped for cash due to using the caregiving service. Because if it's allowed to pass just because there's no money, then it becomes a matter of might makes right. I diligently followed the advice of my lawyer and proceeded with the procedures. Then, one day, about a year later, Ken appeared before me again, breaking the promise we made at the cafe a year ago. I had been conducting all negotiations with Ken through my lawyer because I never wanted to see his face again. Seeing Ken for the first time in a year, he looked not only haggard but also disheveled, with his clothes worn and torn, far from living an ordinary life. He looked so pitifully shabby that even a homeless person living in the park seemed healthier.
Begging for your help is my lifelong wish. Please, help me.
With tear-filled eyes, Ken rubbed his face against my clothes, pleading with such a pathetic appearance that I couldn't bear to look. As I raised my face to gauge his expression, even though our eyes met for just a moment, Ken started rambling about his personal affairs without being asked, as if he misunderstood something. I didn't want to hear it, and I wanted to leave the scene, but Ken's grip on my clothes was too strong. I couldn't break free, so I was forced to listen to him against my will. Despite his tear-stained face and disheveled appearance, his speech was verbose, perhaps to elicit sympathy. In summary, he and his affair partner are being sued for alimony and child support, and apparently, he's incapacitated. His mistress not only left him but is also demanding compensation for breaking their engagement and child support for their son. So what? You reap what you sow. Instead of lamenting your misfortune, why don't you work hard and pay child support? Perhaps because I spoke loudly, others nearby could hear Ken's story. Realizing that our conversation was being overheard, Ken's grip loosened. Taking advantage of that moment, I shook off his grasp and quickly turned my back to him. It's entirely his own fault, and the story about his mistress demanding alimony and child support is none of my concern. I have no intention of helping him, and frankly, it's his problem to deal with.
There's really no one else but you. My parents won't help me anymore, and I'm under immense pressure from her. I'm at my wit's end, please.
Hey, can't you give it a rest already? Didn't I tell you a year ago to stay away from us? I don't want to see your face, hear your voice, or anything else about you. Deal with your own problems.
Don't say that. Didn't we promise to help each other and live together once? Wasn't our feelings back then genuine?
Ken's selfishness, talking only about his own feelings, filled me with anger. Who trampled on those feelings? Who left me in tatters without any help? I'm done. Seriously, how much longer do you think you can manipulate our lives with your selfishness? I've had enough. I'm calling the police if you don't stop. But, the police. The word police seemed to have an effect, as Ken hunched his back and audibly sniffled. But as he did so, a passerby captured his tearful state on their smartphone, and Ken, sobbing, slowly walked away. I decided to report this incident to my lawyer just in case. According to my lawyer, if he ignores another warning and approaches me again, I can scare him off by mentioning the police. It was reassuring to have a strong ally. However, my lawyer also warned me that warnings might become ineffective once he gets used to them, so I should remain vigilant and maintain a strong sense of security. After that, some time passed, and Cannon and Leon were able to attend kindergarten again, eliminating the need for my parents to look after them. While my parents were somewhat disappointed that they had less time with their grandchildren, Cannon and Leon were delighted to be able to play with their friends again. I continued my part-time job at the housekeeping service, but I had become completely accustomed to it, and now I even had regular clients who requested my services. As I witnessed the growth of my children, I realized that I, too, was growing, and I enjoyed fulfilling days in both work and private life. Meanwhile, according to what I heard through my lawyer, Ken and my in-laws finally ran out of money to use the care service, resulting in financial difficulties. They ended up selling the family home, which, despite being old and dilapidated, didn't fetch as much money as they had hoped. They had to place my father-in-law in a care facility, and now Ken, my in-laws, and my father-in-law were living in a cramped, old apartment. However, despite changing their living situation, they still didn't have enough money, so my in-laws were forced to work. My father-in-law, stressed by working again after retirement and being supervised by younger colleagues, became completely overwhelmed and started drinking even more heavily than before. While my in-laws were working hard to make ends meet, my mother-in-law, who couldn't work for long due to her health, stayed at home, resulting in a decrease in income and an even more difficult life. Of course, even though they didn't have money, I had no intention of giving them a grace period for alimony and child support. The procedures have already been completed, so even if it's in installments, I'm making sure to get him to pay somehow. If they don't, they will not be able to devote the money to Cannon and Leon, who will be paying more in the future. Besides, if we wait for the payment, they will surely get carried away and think we will wait for them again. That's why everyone, my parents and the lawyer, advised me not to show any kindness. It might seem harsh, but considering what he did to me, this is only fair. As for his ex-lover, she's also receiving alimony and child support like me, working part-time as a single mother to raise her child properly. I was a bit worried about her ability to care for her child, given her affair, but it seems she's doing well, which is a relief. I can only hope that Ken will also change his self-centered nature and start paying attention to things other than himself. But that doesn't mean I'll ever get back together with him.
Cannon, Leon. We're going to be late for kindergarten. Hurry up.
Let's do our best for another day. For the sake of Cannon and Leon's smiles.